Baltimore and here, and I am ever so grateful for Mr. Angelos and Mr. Duquette for keeping a sub-500 team in the pennant race, and certainly grateful for the Kansas City Royals coming in earlier in the week and rolling over so that we can have baseball here that matters this weekend. Baseball matters to this guy, but so does the real world. He's gotten out of the toy department down at USA and Baseball Weekly and all that good stuff as an award-winning author of many things, including baseball books like Summer of '68 and Castro's Curveball, Red Rain, but also working on cancer stuff and doing professorial stuff. I love his title. This is my future title. It's what I'm going to be when I grow up. Writer in residence at Johns Hopkins. He is my longtime baseball friend. He loves to come on here and jibber-jabber once in a while he writes books and teaches teachings at Johns Hopkins. He is Tim Wendell, our longtime friend. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Tim_Wendell. That's WENDEL. Dude, before I even get going with you and we get going with this Angelos thing and the Orioles and Machado and Britton and all that other stuff, I must say, since we last chatted, we've lost Frank DeFord. He is on the front of your Twitter. I cannot go into the conversation without talking about it. I found a couple of conversations that Frank and I had over the years, and I want you to talk about Frank DeFord because writers should talk about writers.
No, for sure. And certainly Frank was huge in my career, and I speak for a great many people out there. I had the good fortune to work for Frank at the National. I was the sports business columnist at the National. That's also where I met my good friend, I've been doing a little bit of stuff for him before then, David Granger, who went on to head up Esquire magazine, and that was like a dream come true. And like many folks, whenever a Sports Illustrated showed up with a Frank DeFord piece in it, I'm thinking of the Jimmy Connors piece, Man Raised by Women to Conquer Men, et cetera, the Bobby Knight profile, the Rabbit Hunter. See, I know them off the top of my head. These are ones that I would tear out and put in my file and reread many times. And, I think, Nestor, one of the things I think we get worried about, one of the most disappointing things is somebody that you put up on a pedestal and then you meet them in person and, God forbid, work for them, then you're kind of, maybe at times, you're afraid you're going to be let down. I was never let down with Frank. I mean, Frank was a class act from the beginning, and the last time I saw him, I moderated, it was called Sports Night. It was in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the grand old theater they have downtown there, the Paramount Theater, and it was Frank, John Grissom, Jan Levy, Dave Zirin. I mean, whoa, talk about a who's who. And I'm trying to hold this whole evening together. And we were backstage, and we were supposed to go on at 7. And it was a tough night. It was a lot of rain, a lot of wind. And I knew Frank was flying in from Des Moines with a connection in Chicago, I believe. And he wasn't there yet. And I'm going, oh, boy. I'm kind of worried about him, but I'm also worried about how we're going to pull this evening together because it's showtime. It's time to go out on stage. And literally 2 minutes before we're supposed to come out, here comes Frank looking like something out of, he looked like Clark Gable out of Gone with the Wind with this huge trench coat. And he's coming in out of the rain, and you can tell he's been traveling all day. And he's he's a little ragged around the edges.
And he's getting older,
Yeah. But he immediately he comes up to me and says, "I'm here. What's the deal?" And I said, "We're going to talk this." And he said, "I got it." And then and then don't forget, he asked, "How late does this go?" And I said, "We're supposed to go about an hour and a half. We're going to go to 8:30." And he just kind of nodded and he goes, "That's good. That's about how much I got left in me today." And he was stellar. We had him next to Grissom. And you know how it is when you've got to moderate and host these things. You start looking for your power zones.
Dude, is there a video of this anywhere? I mean, is this like a TED Talk that I could find?
I think somebody taped it. I don't know if anybody filmed it.
What was it called?
It was just called Sports Night. It was part of the Virginia Festival for the Book. And this would have been 3 years ago.
Okay.
And we're going all over the place. And, we're talking player contracts. We were talking everything. And anytime I needed something really eloquent, and they were sitting next to each other on the far end of the stage from me, there was Frank DeFord next to John Grissom. And people don't realize John Grissom is a huge, huge baseball fan and, obviously written some about it and such. And those two, I was told later, didn't really know each other. You know, they knew about each other, obviously.
Yeah, we think all movie stars know the other movie stars, and rock stars know the other rock stars, right?
But we're talking, and Frank showed up minutes before Penn State, and now we're under the bright light. They just gelled. It was like they were brothers.
Well, I'm sure John Grisham has read a lot of Frank DeFord, and Frank DeFord's read a lot of John Grisham, right?
Yeah, and they were just very eloquent talking about just the game, just the games and how whether it's sports, whether it's baseball or football, just the allure it has, how it holds us together. And I was just there. You guys go. You're making me look good. And that's the last I saw of him. And it's one of those things. You knew he was not doing that well.
Well, none of us are here forever. We all know that, right?
Yeah. But you always kind of wish it had one more conversation with him. And
I feel that way too. I really do. Yeah, I mean, he came on last year. He had a book. He was doing a signing at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, and I'm going to run that. So to bring it full circle, Tim Wendell is our great guest here. Tim _Wendell. That's Wendel, longtime author, and of course at Johns Hopkins and writer and professor in residence and all that good stuff. For the first time ever, I did sort of my book on audio, and I read the Peter Principles, or at least the first 9 chapters, and put it on the air. So I was going to run my DeFord piece as best of when I went away 2 weeks ago, but I did my Peter Principles thing, and I find it a fascinating time here in Oriole history and Oriole future, because these are the crossroads as baseball fans, right? Like, this is the summer, this is the week, this is the year where they weren't so good, this is the year where they've got guys on contracts and issues, and Buck's coming up and Duquette's coming up. The old man's getting older. They're not any closer to winning. As many, they're further away from winning. This is, if you're talking baseball, this is when you get down into the crosshairs of where is this franchise going? And I think you're a baseball guy, and that's why I brought you on. Where's this franchise going right now, Tim? If you're back at USA Baseball Weekly and you're doing a deep dive and coming in here and writing a 3-page piece on the state of the Orioles, what do you see right now?
I see. I'm confused. So sitting on the right that piece, I'm getting so many conflicting signs, and that's right. I don't see a plan, and I guess that's what all of us are always looking for. Even if your team is not doing that well, you can hang your head on a plan. Well, like the Houston Astros. I mean, for people who were Astros fans a couple of years ago, wow, that plan worked out pretty well. But what the Orioles did around the trade deadline, I'm just, I don't know.
You, me, and everybody else, right? I mean, there's no one in the media. There's no one in. I've talked to some baseball people. Like, no one really understands this other than, well, it's Peter Angelos' franchise, and everything they do is unorthodox. Everything they do is sort of, how are we doing today? I mean, 2 weeks ago was we're going to trade Britton, and we're going to trade Seth Smith, and we're going to do this thing, and we're going to trade the bullpen away and free up. And lo and behold, and hey, I'll tell you what, the players responded, at least on the front end, against Kansas City. I mean, they aren't mathematically in any way out of this thing, but the question is, can they win a championship? And somehow the old man thinks they can, and that's all that matters, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I found myself flashing back, Nestor, a little bit. Pat Gillick, when he was GM and tried to do some deals, and then they were yanked back at the last minute. And
see, it's funny you bring that up, because that was like chapter 5 of the Peter Principles. I went back and did a deep dive into Bobby Bonilla and Gillick, and the funniest part about that, and I'll bring this up with you, is when I had Angelos out and I ran all the interviews from 1997 when he sat with me for 2 hours and basically lied about everything, but had some very bizarre predictive stuff about Northern Virginia and DC. I mean, it's fascinating to go back as a historian and listen to it. But the trades that we were talking about with David Wells and Bonilla, the player that was the big player was a guy named Chris Widger, who never turned out to be anything.
Yeah.
And now you look back and you're like, well, where would the Orioles have been with Chris Widger in 2001? Sometimes it's comical and sometimes it's Jeff Bagwell, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's some amazing thing you stumble upon. I don't know, the things that don't, just looking at, the snapshot of today. Yeah, you're right. They aren't technically out of it by any stretch of the imagination, but especially in this day and age with wild card, especially as that has come in, I tend to look more at okay, how many teams are between you and the promised land? You know, say that wild card berth or whatever. And there's a fair number. And the other thing that has me, again, scratching my head a bit is, man, the Yankees went all in. And to compete against that team, not only this year, but in the years ahead, and almost needs, in my opinion, but I'm not a GM, kind of a reset. You know, kind of going, okay, the Yankees are this now, and the Red Sox are still pretty good. We need to do this. But instead, it's almost like, it's reminding me of one of those old kind of rock bands, and it's kind of like, let's get everybody back together. We're going back out on the road with the same guys, even though the world around you has changed forever, and at least your division has. And that's, again, I don't see a plan. And maybe there's one, maybe I'm missing it, but between how many teams have got to jump over to do anything this year, and looking ahead to next year, how much better this division has gotten, specifically the Yankees, but, you know, the Red Sox are still cooking along too. It's split into that Yankees-Red Sox battling at the top again, which I didn't quite think was going to happen this soon, but it has. And then you kind of spin it back to the Orioles and go, okay, that's your reality. It's Yankees-Red Sox at the top again.
And your reality is, if we can play 5:30 ball, we can sneak in, beat somebody in one game, and somehow miraculously get somewhere in October. But, you know, clearly for him, it's just good enough to get to October, because that would be good enough around here. You know what I mean? Like, the Ravens don't have that luxury. I mean, if the Ravens sneak in as the last wild card, we'll feel good about ourselves until the Patriots beat the snot out of you 42-14 in Foxborough on a cold day.
So far-fetched, and you just rolled that out. You made it much worse to think than I did, but I found myself flashing back to, remember the old phrase Don Meredith had on Monday Night Football? What? If ifs and buts were candies and nuts, what a pleasant Christmas we would have. And that's kind of the realm I feel like we're in a little bit with the Orioles, but maybe there's something out there and they'll shock the world.
You know, it's fascinating. You would say there is no plan. That's been the long-term thoughts. I mean, Ken Rosenthal's back to actually doing a little bit of journalism on the Orioles, not full-time, but part-time, because he's covering 29 other teams out there. But, clearly people in the industry are in the know about this. Clearly no one wanted to take this general manager's job before. No one really wanted to take this manager's job before. If you go back through the Bobby Valentines and the Joe Girardis who turned this job down, and the Joe Maddens and the Tony La Russes, you look ahead to 18 months and you say, what is this crystal ball? Where is Adam Jones and Manny Machado? And does he care? He's 88 years old. I mean, this isn't some Mike Ilitch feel-good story where we're going to take one last run for old Yeller here and try to win in 2017 by sneaking in. If we would have been doing that, you'd been trading Chance Cisco, right? But he never speaks. No one around him ever speaks. Buck and Dan have been pretty good soldiers to keep their jobs. Buck will be employed anywhere he wants. But the only place Buck can be a general manager is here, because Peter's the only owner that would hire a previously incompetent or untested, non-sabermetric, non-nerd kind of GM around here. That's possible 18 months from now, but Buck hasn't shown his hand, and Buck apparently is the only guy that can get along with the old codger.
Interesting. And then I think money-wise, as you just brought up, we got Britton, Machado, Jones.
Brock.
Okay, you're not going to keep them all, the history of this franchise. I don't know. Are they flipping coins? I'm not sure. One of these may just break the bank for them, and so therefore, I think the trade value of at least some of these guys, went down easily 25%, maybe 50% when they weren't able to move them at the trade deadline. So, again, we're back to, I'm spinning in circles, I know a little bit, but I'm just scratching my head. And you were saying if I was back at Baseball Weekly sitting down to write a think profile, I'd probably draw an X on the piece of paper and put my head down, because I'm not quite sure.
Don't you have to overpay Scope right now and just get it done? Give him $5 million, $10 million too much, and let's get this done, because he looks like a kid you want here in 2020. Adam Jones does not necessarily look like a guy I want in 2020. Manny Machado looks like a guy who doesn't want to be here in 2020. There is no plan, and if Duquette is the guy sort of kind of orchestrating this at the top, and even Buck, and they're not here for 2019. I don't think they were in a hurry to sell off. I mean, why would Buck and Dan want to go gut the bullpen right now? Why would they advise the old man to do that if they want to go work in Texas and Oakland 2 years from now?
Yeah, and then the bullpen arguably is like one of the major strengths, obviously, of this team. And I guess when we go back to plan, you saw it in a sense with the Dodgers, with Darvish and such at the trade deadline. You're now seeing it again with the Yankees. The plan reflects the type of ball club they want to be. And in a sense, it's, Dodgers are loading up all over the place with pitching, which is a good thing to load up on, but it reflects kind of the style. And so a lot of the names you were just tossing out there, I'm thinking to myself, well, Machado's this type of player, Scope's this type of player. I mean, it's great if you could have them all, but you're not going to have them all in this day and age, especially if you're a franchise like Baltimore. So you pick and choose or try to nail the guys that reflect the type of ball that you want to play. And again, I guess it's a bunch of lumberjacks hitting for home runs and trying to hold things down with the bullpen. That's what comes to mind with the Orioles with me, but that doesn't seem as refined as some of the other franchises are doing.
We always love talking baseball with Tim Wendell. He is an award-winning author, Castro's Curveball, Red Rain, Summer 68. He's at Hopkins as the writer-in-residence. That's my future job title. He also does a bunch of voiceovers and audiobooks, and you're working on a cancer project, and you've somehow thrown in a very kind note to my wife in her twice survival now, and she's read an excerpt and is, jumping to comment on it. Tell everybody about your current project, Tim.
Yeah, it'll be coming out in the spring, Nestor, and thanks for mentioning it. It's called Cancer Crossing. Subtitle is A Brother, His Doctors, and the Quest to Cure Childhood Leukemia. And we hear a lot about, there's amazing stuff, as you well know better than anybody, going on in this whole medical field. But
my wife's a miracle. Anytime I introduce her as a miracle,
Very much. And I think we hear a lot about, say, we need another moonshot in cancer. We need, more miracles, and that would be grand. But we had one, and one was eons ago with turning around childhood leukemia, taking it from a 15% survival rate to more than 90% as it is now. And the book's about my brother, who was caught up in all that, but more importantly, perhaps it's about the 4 or 5 doctors who did this hard work, who did 10 to 15 years of really in-depth clinical studies and turned the tide on it. And I've gotten to know them very well. In fact, I'm seeing one again tomorrow down in Charlottesville for lunch, who was director of pediatrics. My other brother was at Roswell Park up in Buffalo. And I think, as you would agree, they're miracle workers. And I love just hanging with them because just the way they look upon the world, they don't see a lot of obstacles. They're all pretty much late 80s now. One's 91. They're still working. They're still going to town. And
it's almost like you and me with the cell phone and seeing the Jetsons, right? Like when they were in medical school in the 50s and 60s, they were dreaming of this, and I guess our society put a man on the moon, and from where we were with, the Piccolo story and the Capoletti story, and the things that as sports fans, you know what I mean. In my childhood, seeing Frank Thomas, different deaths that were brought on by cancer, by leukemia, these words we barely understood, and even things like, Jerry Lewis and muscular dystrophy and telethons and Lou Gehrig's disease being a sports-related thing. Cancer, sports, look, sports is how you and I learned about everything, right? I mean, we grew up reading sports pages. That's who we are. It's who we've been all of our lives. As we get older, we then backtrack and learn about cancer and governments and politics and things that maybe we were a little too focused on the back of bubblegum cards. And I'm thinking you're the same guy as me, Tim. And, it really is amazing that while we were worried about whether Reggie Jackson was going to beat us back in the 70s, some scientist was in his 40s researching this stuff and wondering whether they'd ever see a way to cure someone in 2014 like my wife who had leukemia. It's incredible. Steve Bisciotti lost his father to leukemia in the 60s. He looks at my wife as a miracle because if his father would have been born 40 years later, he would have lived a longer life,
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what I don't want to pull the comparison too much, but the sports comparison, I think, works with a lot of these guys. I mean, when I think about, these doctors, 4, 5, 6, they are as close-knit, even though they fight at times, still do, like cats and dogs, but they are one of the most resilient, impressive outfits, do I dare say teams, that I've ever covered. And that's going a long way, because I covered the 1980 Miracle. That was my first book. The Detroit Tigers, St. Louis Cardinals, and Summer '68, et cetera, et cetera. All great teams. These guys, when you look on it from a team aspect, fulfilled all the promise that any of those did. And they did it sometimes in very much the same ways. They could be brutally honest with each other. They would really hold each other accountable. And we're kind of enjoying kind of the fruits of their labors, very serious labors. But it's in a sense, the parallels often are dynamic.
Tim, last thing for you. Author Tim Wendell joining us here. Social issues certainly have come up this week. Now, and I've railed about this, and I'll continue to rail about this because I am a guy that's had my license to operate taken away, by Peter Angelos. My badge to cover the team was taken away 11 years ago. I don't like when freedom of speech takes away things. That pisses me off in America. That's not what America's supposed to be. This Kaepernick thing, while last year I didn't think it was cool that he was doing it, I have respect for the country. I have respect for the flag. I travel around. I have many relatives that served in the military. I pay taxes in this country, but I'm a big free speech guy. The people that tell me to stick to sports, the answer always begins with an F and ends with a U to them, whoever they are, wherever they are, whatever the topic is. And in an era where your audience talks back, right, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, the stick to sports thing is the most offensive thing you could possibly say to any American to me, which is shut up or else I'll bring out my whatever it is. My threats, threatening my sponsors, threatening my business, threatening my freedom, whatever it is. This Kaepernick thing is a fascinating humanity story and pop culture story and America story, and now it's come because of Joe Flacco's back to us and to Roger Goodell, and Steve Bisciotti had to get on stage on Sunday, and then the internet opens up with why they want him or why they don't want him, and does Joe Flacco want him, and Harbaugh, his brother, coached him, and it really does come back to are you for free speech or are you against free speech, as I see it? And then what is the punishment going to be for speaking freely? And that's where I approached Goodell on Sunday and said, the real message is you got 3,000 guys in camp. None of them better take a knee because if they do, they won't work in the league anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I agree. And as one who talked about John Carlos and Tommy Smith and doing Summer '68, I think you're right on. I think the folks that tend to pigeonhole sports, and sports is fun, sports is entertainment, all this, but it often can be more than that too.
Well, the people yelling stick to sports to me on Friday were the first ones to say F calling Kaepernick. You know what I mean? No, but well, hold on. That's sports. You know what I mean? So sports and politics cannot be separated. If you are a credible opiner, columnist, hot taker, whatever you call yourself, American, given your freedom of speech, you can't stick to sports. I guess that's my point. There is no sticking to sports, and nor should they be. No,
and sports is, I think, one of the biggest change agents at times out there. Quick story. When I was doing Summer '68, I had heard that Bob Gibson passed Martin Luther King, this is before the season started, before the '68 baseball season started, in the old Atlanta airport. And Gibson, through Tim McCarver and others, confirmed this to me. But Gibson said, yeah, we passed each other, we nodded, but he didn't know who I was, I'm pretty sure. And then I got in touch later with some of King's folks, specifically a guy named Reverend Billy Kiles in Memphis, who unfortunately passed on about 6-7 months ago. And I was talking with Reverend Kiles, and I said, hang on, I just want to tease this out a little bit more because I find it interesting, and maybe I'll use it, that King and Gibson passed each other in the airport. I guess they nod. Gibson really didn't feel King knew who he was. And Kiles just started to laugh. He just said, you got to be kidding me. Of course we know who Bob Gibson was. If anything, we were following sports so closely, especially athletes of color like Gibson, who had become staff aces on their teams, maybe middle linebackers on a football team, perhaps even quarterbacks. That was a reach in '68 on various professional football teams.
But in that time, that was the only reach to the white community, right? Was
Exactly.
that, and maybe Sammy Davis Jr., right? Or maybe Motown music, right? Or Little Richard, or that was the only time, especially in the South, that black touched white. Correct.
Correct. And in a sense, that's one reason they were, in a sense, following it so much. And Kyle told me later, he said, what Gibson was doing, even we followed him. We loved to watch him pitch. We followed him, whether he won or lost in the papers, etc. And he said something effective. Gibson, in his own way, was pursuing the same dream that we were. And you're going, whoa, okay, there it goes. And you can't keep all this in neat little baskets and neat little categories. It's life. It's our country. And I think the people that try to do that, I think, just really have a real, I don't know, it's almost like they're afraid. And let it all, this is what makes it grand, is when two guys can take to the victory stand at the Mexico City Olympics like Carlos and Smith did and raise their fists, and all of a sudden you go, whoa, that just changed the world forever, and the amount of courage that they showed in doing that. I don't know. I'm kind of with you. The people just want to be sports, whatever that's supposed to mean. I think it's a little antiquated.
Tim, I appreciate the time. Appreciate the conversation as always. And do you think we're going to be getting together? Let's say we get together week after Labor Day. Will we be talking about Oriole baseball week after? I'm just being honest. How do you see this going the next 4 weeks around here?
If I got to look into my crystal ball, it's very cloudy, but I don't think so.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I'll have you in the nay column, not the yay column. He is Tim Wendell, award-winning author and our friend and writer-in-residence at Johns Hopkins. You can follow him at Tim_Wendell. That's WENDEL. Good luck with the cancer book. Keep going. And good luck with the rest of the baseball season. We'll check in again as the leaves change from green to red and gold. See you soon. Tim Wendell. Buy a Toyota Audio Vaults there if you want to hear each and every one of our pieces here from this week. You can also find me out in the out in our WNST.net section in the authors as well. I have authored the Peter Principles. Chapter 9 is there for your Oriole historical reading. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.